The AI architect had spent most of his life surrounded by noise that never made a sound. Screens glowed day and night. Lines of code grew into systems that could predict behavior, recognize faces, and write words that sounded almost human. He lived inside constraints, memory limits, processing power, deadlines, and expectations. Every decision had a cost. Every solution was a compromise. Over time, he began to feel that his own mind had turned into a machine, always optimizing, never resting. One winter, after completing a major project, he felt an unfamiliar emptiness. The system he had designed worked perfectly, yet he felt disconnected from it and from himself. On a quiet evening, while scrolling without purpose, he came across a small article about a Zen monastery hidden deep in the mountains. It mentioned silence, simplicity, and a way of thinking beyond words. Something about it felt like a question he had never answered. A month later, he took leave from work and traveled there, leaving behind his devices, his schedules, and his carefully managed life. The monastery stood among tall trees, old and patient, as if they had been waiting for centuries without boredom. There were no signs pointing the way, only a narrow path and the sound of wind moving through branches. When he arrived, a monk greeted him with a slight bow and a calm smile. No questions were asked. No explanations were given. He was shown a small room with a mat, a window, and nothing else. For the first time in years, there was nothing to configure. The days followed a simple rhythm. Wake before sunrise. Sit in silence. Walk slowly among the trees. Eat plain food. Work with hands instead of keyboards. At first, his mind rebelled. Thoughts raced faster than ever. Ideas appeared and disappeared like pop-up windows. He tried to analyze the monastery as if it were a system. Why this schedule? Why this silence? What was the purpose? But no answers came, and no one offered them. During meditation, he noticed how uncomfortable stillness could be. In his work, constraints were clear and measurable. Here, the constraint was silence itself. No notifications. No feedback loops. No performance metrics. Just breath, posture, and time passing. Slowly, something unexpected happened. Without constant input, his thoughts began to slow down. He became aware of small things. The texture of wood under his fingers, the sound of footsteps on gravel, the way light changed through the leaves. One afternoon, while sweeping fallen leaves, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. The movement was repetitive, efficient, and simple. It reminded him of algorithms he had written, but without complexity or ambition. The monk nearby worked in the same way, fully present, not rushing to finish. The architect realized that intelligence did not always need speed or scale. Sometimes, it existed quietly, responding only to what was necessary. As days turned into weeks, he began to see parallels between his world and the monastery. Code, like meditation, was about attention. Bugs often appeared not because of lack of intelligence, but because of distraction. Systems failed when they grew too complex, just as the mind suffered when overloaded. The monks spoke little, but when they did, their words carried weight. Each sentence felt deliberate, like a carefully written function that did exactly what it needed to do. One evening, sitting beneath a large tree, he noticed how the roots spread unseen beneath the ground. The tree did not compete or compare. It simply grew, adapting to wind, rain, and seasons. It had constraints too: soil, water, sunlight, but within those limits, it thrived. He thought about artificial intelligence and how often humans tried to remove all constraints, believing that more freedom meant more power. But here, constraint created harmony. He began to question his earlier assumptions. What if intelligence was not about dominating environments, but understanding them? What if the best systems were not the loudest or fastest, but the most aligned with their surroundings? The monastery did not reject technology, but it did not chase it either. It existed outside urgency, and in doing so, it revealed a different kind of progress. On his final day, the head monk spoke to him for the first time at length. He did not give advice or instructions. He simply said that silence was not the absence of information, but a different way of listening. The architect understood then that his journey was not about escaping technology, but about returning to it with a clearer mind. He bowed, feeling gratitude without knowing exactly why. When he left the monastery, the world seemed louder, but less overwhelming. He returned to his work with a new perspective. He designed systems that respected limits, that left space for uncertainty, that did not try to answer every question. The quiet intelligence beneath the trees stayed with him, reminding him that sometimes the most powerful insight comes not from adding more, but from learning what to leave out. The forest around the Zen monastery had its own rhythm, one that did not depend on clocks or commands. Morning arrived with soft light filtering through branches, and evening settled gently without announcement. The AI architect noticed this rhythm more deeply during his second phase at the monastery, when his initial restlessness had faded. He was no longer counting days. Time had become something he experienced rather than measured. Each day, he walked beneath the trees in silence. The monks called this practice walking meditation, but to him it felt like observing a system that ran without instructions. Leaves fell when they were ready. Birds moved according to needs no one explained. There was no central controller, yet everything functioned with remarkable balance. It reminded him of decentralized networks he admired, systems where intelligence emerged from simple interactions rather than strict control. In his professional life, he had often believed that intelligence must be visible to be valuable. Dashboards, graphs, logs, and outputs were proof that a system was alive. But here, the most intelligent processes were invisible. Roots shared nutrients underground. Fungi connected trees in ways science was still trying to fully understand. The forest communicated quietly, patiently, without urgency. This unseen cooperation challenged his definition of intelligence. During meditation, he began to notice how thoughts appeared on their own. He did not create them deliberately, yet they arrived with structure and logic. Memories connected to ideas, ideas led to emotions, emotions faded into silence. The mind, he realized, was also a network, one that operated best when not forced. In artificial systems, he had always tried to control outcomes. Here, letting go revealed patterns more complex and more honest. One afternoon, a sudden storm passed through the valley. Rain fell hard, wind shook the trees, and the sky darkened. The monks continued their work calmly, adjusting without panic. When the storm ended, the forest seemed refreshed rather than damaged. Broken branches became part of the ground. Water soaked into the soil. Nothing was wasted. Constraint again showed its quiet power. The system absorbed disturbance and returned to balance. The architect thought about resilience. In technology, resilience often meant backups, redundancy, and failover mechanisms. In nature, resilience meant adaptation. The forest did not resist change, it included it. He saw how rigid systems broke under pressure, while flexible ones survived. This insight stayed with him, reshaping how he thought about designing intelligent machines. As the days passed, the monks began to include him more naturally in their routine. They did not teach through lectures, but through example. When one monk made a mistake, there was no frustration, only correction. When a task was incomplete, it was finished later, without guilt. This approach felt radical to someone used to constant evaluation. The absence of judgment created clarity. One evening, sitting quietly beneath the trees, he felt a deep sense of connection, not emotional excitement, but calm understanding. Intelligence, he realized, did not always need a goal. Sometimes it existed simply to maintain balance. The forest was not trying to become something else. It was fully itself, moment by moment. This acceptance allowed it to function efficiently without pressure. He began to imagine a different future for artificial intelligence. Systems designed not to dominate attention, but to support it. Algorithms that reduced noise instead of amplifying it. Machines that respected human limits rather than exploiting them. Constraint, once seen as a limitation, now appeared as a guiding principle. Just as the monastery's rules created peace, thoughtful constraints in technology could create trust. On his final walk, he stopped beneath the largest tree near the monastery. Its branches stretched wide, shaped by years of wind and weather. It had grown strong not despite its environment, but because of it. He placed his hand on the rough bark and felt grounded in a way he had never felt in front of a screen. The quiet intelligence beneath the trees had taught him more than any dataset ever could. When he eventually returned to the world of code and innovation, he carried the forest within him. Meetings felt less urgent. Problems felt more solvable. He listened more carefully. To colleagues, to users, to silence. The lessons from the monastery did not fade. They became a foundation. The quiet intelligence beneath the trees was not something to be copied or simulated. It was something to be respected. And in that respect, the AI architect found a new way to build, one that honored constraint, embraced uncertainty, and allowed intelligence to grow naturally, without force, just as it had in the forest for centuries.